They say history is written by the winners, but sometimes it's written by the scammers who got away with it, until they didn't. What if I told you that some of the most sophisticated frauds in human history didn't just fool millions, they reshaped global markets, destroyed fortunes, and exposed the vulnerabilities of entire financial systems that were supposed to protect us? From the man whose name still defines the most infamous investor deception, the Ponzi scheme, to a Silicon Valley genius worshipped as the next Steve Jobs, all the way to a corporate empire that faked its way into becoming the seventh largest company in America, only to collapse overnight. This is the ultimate story of manipulation, greed, and how the world's smartest people fell for the dumbest lies. Welcome back to Blood and Fortune, where we turn the shadows of financial history into lessons for the future. If you think you know these scams, wait until you hear what they hid from the public. And before we dive in, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe great scams happen because people are evil, or because society makes it easy for them? Share your take, subscribe, and watch until the end, because the final conclusion of this video might change how you trust money forever. Let's go back to the early 1900s, Boston, Massachusetts. A well-dressed Italian immigrant walked into the United States quietly, with charm, confidence, and a wild idea. What if you promised people unbelievable returns and simply used one investor's money to pay the previous one? That man was Charles Ponzi, and what he created would become the template for thousands of copycats across the next century, costing investors an estimated $100 billion in just the last 20 years. But here's what most people don't know. His scam didn't begin with fancy spreadsheets or clever math. It began with international postal coupons, a low-tech tool to send letters cheaper across borders. Ponzi believed he had found a loophole: buy postal coupons in countries with weak currencies, redeem them in countries with stronger ones, and multiply money instantly. He claimed the process yielded a 50% profit in 45 days. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Finance. Ordinary people sold their homes to invest. Men cashed out their life savings. The rich whispered his name at country clubs. But in reality, there was never any coupon arbitrage. Ponzi was simply moving money in circles, classic fraud. Investors weren't getting returns. They were getting recycled lies dressed as profits. And when the system couldn't sustain new deposits, the entire pyramid collapsed. Thousands were ruined. But the scariest part is this: even after being exposed, people defended him, saying he was a visionary misunderstood by regulators. Because when greed meets charisma, intelligence doesn't stand a chance. Fast forward a century to the late 1990s and early 2000s, and a young woman named Elizabeth Holmes walks onto the stage of Silicon Valley. 19 years old, Stanford dropout, black turtleneck, vision to create a device that could test hundreds of diseases using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. She called it Theranos, inspired by therapy and diagnosis. Investors didn't just believe her, they worshipped her. She was celebrated as the female Steve Jobs, the youngest self-made billionaire. At its peak, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. High-ranking military officials, former U.S. secretaries of state, global business icons sat on her board. Yet, despite all that, the technology never worked. But here's what makes it terrifying. Holmes knew it didn't. Her own engineers begged her to slow down. Scientists warned her that the data was inaccurate. Patients were receiving false HIV results, incorrect cancer diagnoses. Instead of stopping, she silenced critics, threatened staff, and manipulated tests to make them appear valid. She managed to scam not only investors and regulators, but even Walgreens Pharmacy, which rolled out her blood machines in stores before any real verification. The entire fraud was so deep that government health agencies admitted they relied purely on trust. No real testing was done. It took a whistleblower and a Wall Street Journal investigation to expose her. And even after the truth came out, some people still defended her. Why? Because just like Ponzi, she sold a dream that felt too profitable, too convenient, to question. And then there's Enron, the corporate monster that turned accounting fraud into an art form. Late 1990s. Houston, Texas. Enron was seen as a titan of innovation in the energy trading world. High-tech, futuristic, worth $70 billion at its peak. Wall Street analysts called it the most innovative company in America. Their CEO, Jeffrey Skilling, was praised as a visionary. But all that innovation, it was mostly fake. Enron used a tactic called mark-to-market accounting, which allowed them to book future potential profits as actual earnings. Imagine signing a $100 million energy contract expected to yield money over 10 years, and immediately adding the entire amount to your profit statement on day one. The company showed massive growth. Stock prices exploded, but the real money never came. They were drowning in debt and operational losses. So they hid everything in secret shell companies, off-the-book entities used to absorb debt and make the balance sheet look healthy. Even worse, major auditing firm Arthur Andersen knowingly approved it, despite realizing it was fraud. Employees invested their pensions in Enron stock, believing it would continue rising. Then, in December 2001, reality hit. Enron collapsed in the biggest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history until that point. Thousands lost jobs. Billions evaporated. Retirement funds disappeared. And what's chilling is that Enron executives cashed out millions before the crash, while employees were locked from selling their stock. If there's one lesson that connects all three frauds, Ponzi, Theranos, and Enron, it's this: scams happen not because the liar is smart, but because their victims wanted to believe. What if I told you that the greatest scams in history didn't succeed because they were cleverly designed, but because they exploited something far more primal, our own human psychology? Beneath every billion-dollar fraud lies a weakness not in economics, but in our behavior. It's not about complex revenue sheets, groundbreaking patents, or secret trading algorithms. It's about greed, fear, ego, and our desperate need to believe in miracles. Today, we're going to explore how three of the most infamous scams, Charles Ponzi's investor dream, Elizabeth Holmes's Theranos revolution, and Enron's corporate brilliance, use psychological warfare far more powerful than any financial tool. And what might shock you is that the exact same tactics are still being used today, right now, on social media, in startup pitches, and even in political campaigns. The victims aren't just wealthy investors. Sometimes they're employees, governments, and even entire populations. Let's start with the original master, Charles Ponzi, and the two psychological triggers he weaponized: urgency and exclusivity. He told people his investment opportunity was limited and highly confidential. Only a few insiders know about this postal coupon trick, he'd say. Invest now, or you'll lose your chance forever. He wasn't just selling returns. He was selling the fear of missing out, a feeling we all know too well. Once his first few payouts were made, using other people's money of course, he unleashed his next weapon: social proof. He'd have smiling investors stand outside his office, proudly flashing their checks for newspaper photographers. Here's the psychological key. When we see others winning, our brain often suspends doubt. It's an instinct. This led directly to confirmation bias. Investors didn't bother to research the complicated postal coupon method he claimed to use. Instead, they only looked for evidence that supported his story. Think about that. Even after he was arrested, many of his investors swore they would reinvest if he was ever released. Why? Because once a lie aligns with our deepest hopes, our brain starts defending the liar. That very same psychological phenomenon is the foundation of most modern financial bubbles and the get-rich-quick schemes you see all over the internet. Now, let's turn to Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. She mastered a different kind of manipulation, the illusion of genius combined with fear of authority. She meticulously modeled herself after Steve Jobs, the black turtleneck, the specific language style, even deepening her voice, which was allegedly faked. She built an aura of inevitable success. Then, she surrounded herself with power. Her board included generals, former U.S. secretaries of state, and billionaires. These weren't experts in health technology, but they were figures society is conditioned to trust. Investors thought, if a mind like Henry Kissinger supports this, who am I to doubt it? She also used secrecy as a strength, claiming her technology was too sensitive and proprietary to disclose. The result was a culture of fear. People were afraid to ask questions. Employees were told, "You're lucky to be here." Speaking up wasn't just discouraged, it was treated as betrayal. When whistleblowers finally began exposing the truth, she didn't debate them. She hit them with aggressive legal threats, a classic psychological tactic that scares people into silence. But there's another layer here that often gets missed. She crafted a narrative that appealed to our compassion. Cure disease. save lives, help millions. When a scam wraps itself in a morally just cause, it becomes almost unstoppable because to question it feels like you're questioning the good in the world itself. Enron's psychological warfare was entirely different. Their weapon wasn't aimed at individual investors, but at the heart of the financial world, Wall Street itself. They understood one critical thing about high finance. The fear of being wrong is far more powerful than the desire to be right. Analysts praised Enron simply because other analysts were praising Enron. No one wanted to be the lone voice calling out potential fraud, because if they were wrong, their career could be over. This is a classic case of groupthink, where people abandon critical thinking just to maintain social harmony and protect their status. Enron reinforced this with elaborate, lavish meetings and a barrage of buzzwords. They talked about asset-light trading models and innovative deregulated platforms. The language was intentionally complex, designed to intimidate anyone who might have doubts. And here's the darkest part. Inside the company, employees saw suspicious numbers but stayed silent. They assumed their failure to understand meant they were stupid, not that the numbers were fake. The smartest people in the room pretended to understand Enron, not because they actually did, but because they were terrified of looking like the only idiot who didn't get it. That one, simple, human fear cost the world billions of dollars and destroyed thousands of lives. Now here's the final twist. Each one of these scams could have been detected early. They all had obvious, gaping flaws. Ponzi had no verifiable trading documentation. Theranos never published a single peer-reviewed medical paper to support its claims. Enron was reporting imaginary future profits as current revenue. These weren't tiny, invisible cracks. They were massive, open wounds. But as the legendary investor Warren Buffett once said, only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. The tide in finance is truth, and people will often do anything to delay the truth because living in a hopeful belief feels so much better than facing a harsh reality. Today, these same psychological tactics are alive and well. You see them in cryptocurrency rug pulls, in overly hyped startups promising to change the world overnight, in influencer investment schemes, and even in massive government infrastructure projects that are built on fantasy. The tools change, the platforms evolve, but the core psychology remains exactly the same. So, what if the next Enron isn't an energy corporation, but a tech company manipulating AI metrics? What if the next Ponzi isn't a man in a suit, but a viral guru on TikTok promising you passive income from your couch? What if the next Theranos isn't about blood testing, but about brain enhancement, longevity, or even achieving AI immortality? Here's the chilling realization that we all need to confront. Scams evolve. But the psychological triggers they exploit in us? They don't. And that's why understanding this story matters more today than ever before. If there's one truth that history has proven repeatedly, it's this. Financial scams don't end when the fraudster is caught. They evolve. They adapt. They disguise themselves. And they move into newer, more trusted systems. What Ponzi, Holmes, and Enron exploited exists today in forms most people would never question. Tech valuations, AI forecasting, ESG scores, even national economic policy reports. The more complex our world becomes, the easier it is for deception to hide inside algorithms, legal structures, and data manipulation. Every major fraud begins the same way, with a promise. But what fuels it is not the promise itself. It is our willingness to believe that rules don't apply to visionaries. In this video, I'm going to show you why modern society is more vulnerable to scams than ever before, how the next collapse may already be in motion, and what warning signs you must detect before the world does. Watch till the end, because your financial safety might depend on what you learn here. And if you found this eye-opening, hit the subscribe button right now, drop a comment with your thoughts, and stay with me till the final second, because what comes now will change how you look at money forever. Today, scams are no longer carried out by con artists on street corners. They are orchestrated by corporate strategists, backed by Wall Street analysts, and protected by complex regulatory loopholes. Take the 2008 global financial crisis. Banks packaged toxic mortgages into financial products called CDOs, sold them globally, and when it all collapsed, they blamed market failure. But none of it was accidental. Banks approved loans they knew would fail. Rating agencies gave those products AAA scores because they were paid to, and government regulators turned a blind eye. Why? Because the entire system was making money. That's not financial innovation. That's sophisticated fraud. But here's the shocking twist. Almost no top executives went to jail. Just like in Enron's case. Just like Charlie Mitchell in 1929. Just like Elizabeth Holmes initially tried to avoid responsibility. The consequence was so mild that today, banks still use similar tactics, but with AI, data structuring, derivatives, and digital platforms. We didn't eliminate fraud, we upgraded it. The biggest vulnerability today? The belief that people in power must be right. When a billionaire investor endorses a product, when a tech giant invests in a startup, when a government official announces a financial strategy, most people assume due diligence was done. But the truth is, groups with aligned interests validate each other to drive a narrative. During Enron's peak, multiple banks knew something was wrong, but continued issuing loans. During Theranos' rise, pharmaceutical scientists whispered doubts, but didn't dare speak against billion-dollar investors. During Ponzi's climb, newspapers privately expressed suspicions, but chose profit over truth. And today, we may see the same patterns in technologies like AI, synthetic biology, and clean energy capital markets. What if the next trillion-dollar collapse starts from misplaced belief rather than criminal intent? Let's dive into the red flags that history repeatedly shows before a major scam collapses. First, it's too revolutionary to explain. When someone says, "We can't share how it works," it's too advanced. History shows it's often because it doesn't work at all. Second, excessive media hype without independent validation. Ponzi used newspapers. Theranos used Forbes covers. Enron used analyst reports. Today, TikTok millionaires, tech influencers, and VC-backed hype videos. Third, complex financial or technical language designed to intimidate. If the explanation feels confusing, it's intentionally confusing. Real solutions are simple. Fourth, returns or projections that violate historical logic. Charles Ponzi promised 50% in 45 days. Theranos promised a full lab diagnosis from one drop of blood. Enron claimed profit selling energy they didn't even produce. If it contradicts industry realities, it's deception disguised as innovation. And fifth, systemic silence. Every major fraud had insiders who saw the truth but stayed silent due to fear or loyalty. Whistleblowers were always present, but they were ignored until the collapse. Now here's the truth nobody wants to admit. We're entering an era where scams will be harder to detect because they won't come from individuals, they'll come from systems. AI predicting market returns with no transparency. ESG-compliant asset structures hiding debt. Biotech startups pitching miracle gene therapies. Carbon credit markets with no verified impact. Fraud no longer relies on charisma, it relies on data opacity. But here's where education becomes power. The only way to protect yourself is to adopt historical skepticism and financial literacy. The wealthiest investors don't fall for scams, not because they're smarter, but because they're more suspicious. They ask, who verified these claims independently? What's the downside scenario? What happens if this groundbreaking strategy is wrong? And who benefits most from this narrative being believed? The same way world-class poker players don't study cards, they study people. You must do the same with investments, tech claims, and corporate narratives. Because if history has proven anything, it's that every scam ends, eventually. Ponzi was exposed when mail inspectors investigated coupon quantities. Theranos collapsed when independent labs tested the tech. Enron fell when an analyst asked a simple question. Can you explain exactly how you make money? And nobody could. So, what's the greatest defense against fraud? Asking the questions people are afraid to ask. Drop a comment right now. Which of these scams shocked you the most? And do you believe a bigger one is coming soon? Before you move on, remember this. History doesn't protect those who ignore it. It punishes them. Subscribe right now to Blood and Fortune if you want more documentaries that expose what textbooks won't teach you. Hit the like button to tell YouTube this story deserves global attention. Stay till the end of the next video, because the financial system's most dangerous truths are still ahead. Next episode, how one banker may have caused the next crisis. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.